Welcome to Hard Script.
Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories. I watched her from across the room, spinning under the soft chandelier light, laughing in a way I hadn't heard in months. Her hand rested too easily on his shoulder, the kind of touch that said, "This isn't the first time." And in that moment, I knew I wasn't losing her. I'd already lost her. The strange thing about betrayal is how quietly it arrives. It doesn't slam through the door or scream its presence. It shows up dressed like familiarity, a sudden shift in her gaze, a delay in her kiss. The way she used to reach for me in crowded rooms, gone. All of it, replaced with silence and half-hearted explanations. Her name is Rachel. We'd been together for 5 years. I thought we were solid. Built. Not based on fantasy, but on fire-forged moments. When I proposed, she cried. Said yes like she meant it. But something in her changed months later. Her smile became curated, her words rehearsed, and her phone? Always face down. Still, I ignored it. I told myself it was pressure, wedding stress, work. The lies we feed ourselves when we're desperate to keep believing. And then her sister, Amanda, said something innocent that detonated everything. "You should have seen Rachel last weekend," she'd laughed. She and Brian danced like they were on fire. Brian, a name I hadn't heard in years. An ex. The one she claimed never meant anything. Suddenly, I remembered the text I'd seen by accident weeks earlier. It felt so easy again. Like we never skipped a beat. Back then, I didn't confront her. I observed. Quietly. Coldly. Shadow X. I watched her build her performance, layer by layer, thinking I was still the audience. But I'd already left the show. I stopped fighting for explanations. Stopped offering affection. I became still. Precise. Strategic. And tonight? Tonight was her engagement party. Everyone clapped when we entered. Her smile beamed, polished and hollow. Family flew in. Friends toasted us. And the whole time, she played the role. But I watched her. I saw how her eyes followed Brian. How she slipped her hand into his a moment too long when no one watched, except I always watched. She thought I'd propose again in front of everyone. That I'd pull out the ring, say some sweet rehearsed line, and lock us into a life she had no intention of honoring. But instead, I waited. I waited until the music slowed, until she swayed in Brian's arms like she belonged there. I reached into my pocket, pulled out the ring, and crossed the room toward Amanda. She looked at me, confused. I placed the ring in her hand, leaned close, whispered, "Give it back to her when she's done pretending." Then I turned and walked out. Not angry, not broken, done. This wasn't revenge. This was clarity. I didn't wait to see her face when Amanda handed her the ring. I didn't need to. I'd already seen every possible version of it. Rage, confusion, the fake tears she could summon on command. None of it mattered. My part was finished. The illusion had been severed in silence. Not with shouting. Not with accusations. Just one decision delivered with precision. That's the thing no one prepares them for when the man doesn't scream, doesn't beg, doesn't flinch. He simply walks. As I stepped outside, the air hit me differently. Colder, sharper. Like the weight I'd carried for months was finally gone. I didn't look back. The party continued behind me, laughter, clinking glasses, the curated soundtrack of a lie still playing. And she? She was still inside, wrapped in a scene she couldn't control anymore. People say endings are messy. That closure only comes with confrontation. But that's a lie told by those too afraid to walk away without an audience. I wasn't interested in her apology. I didn't need her reasons. I'd already sat through months of cold mornings, stiff shoulders, and deflected affection. I knew what the truth looked like when it wore a face. I drove in silence that night. No music. No calls. Just the hum of the engine and the steady rhythm of freedom forming in my chest. I didn't go home. I went to a hotel I'd quietly booked earlier that week. One bag. One night. One clean break. The next morning, my phone lit up like a crime scene. Missed calls. Messages. Her name over and over again. Amanda too. Even a few mutual friends. But I didn't open a single one. Not out of spite. Out of discipline. She had made her choices in private, thinking I'd never move. But I was already gone before I left the room. By midday, I got the first voicemail. Her voice. Wobbly, controlled, desperate. "We need to talk." For words that used to mean something. Now they were just sound. I deleted it. That night, I sat at the edge of the bed, staring at nothing. And it was peaceful. Because for the first time in a year, I wasn't holding on to someone who had already let go. I wasn't tracking her distance, trying to fill silences she created. I had finally matched her energy, not by mirroring it, but by rising above it. This wasn't about revenge. It was a reclamation of my time, my peace, my presence. She expected me to fall apart. She didn't realize I'd already been rebuilding myself quietly in the background. While she lied with performance, I moved with strategy. And this was just the beginning. I didn't need to block her. That would have given her a reason to play victim. Instead, I muted her existence. Let her messages pile up. Let her wonder why the usual pattern had stopped. No more chasing, no more explanations. Silence, when applied with precision, becomes a weapon. And I wielded it like a surgeon. By the second day, Amanda messaged me too. Short. Direct. She's a mess. You okay? I didn't answer. Amanda didn't need one. She knew what handing over that ring meant. She was the only one I trusted enough to see the truth months before I acted on it. And now, she was the only one who understood the calm I'd chosen. I hadn't just left the party. I'd left the version of myself that tolerated being sidelined, questioned, replaced emotionally without consent. There was a time I would have asked her what went wrong. I would have believed the excuses, stress, burnout, confusion. I would have held space while she sorted out the storm she created. But that man? He was gone. That week, she tried everything. Emotional reach-outs, digital breadcrumbs, shared memories weaponized to tug at my guilt. A playlist from our road trip. A picture of us from her Instagram story with the caption, "Some things don't fade." As if that wasn't exactly what she'd been doing, fading, frame by frame, for over a year. I watched from a distance as the mask began to crack. Friends started calling, awkwardly asking what had happened. I said little. Let them piece it together from what they'd already seen but never dared to ask about. The coldness in her gaze when I spoke. The way she checked her phone mid-conversation. The absence she wore like a second skin. She had tried to play both sides, keep me loyal while keeping her options open. What she didn't realize is that I had stopped playing entirely. And now, she was dancing alone in a story I refused to feed. By the weekend, she showed up at my apartment. I didn't open the door. Not because I was angry. Because the man she was looking for didn't live there anymore. I had evolved. From patient to precise. From available to untouchable. She wanted reaction. I gave her absence. And that was louder than any scream. Weeks passed, and the silence between us grew waves. She didn't call, didn't text, she hovered. Like an echo chasing a voice that never returns. Those unanswered messages weren't ignored out of spite. They were archived, each one a timestamp of the moment I stopped being part of her world. She tried different versions of her. The nostalgic version showed up wearing his perfume, offering old jokes, gifting framed photos from our travels. When I didn't respond, she became philosophical, posting quotes on freedom, self-love, not settling. It wasn't freedom. It was erasure. And every post was meant to remind the world, and herself, that she never belonged to anyone. I watched from a distance. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because I had already risen above the need. I started rebuilding. I signed the new lease, furnished my place quietly, invested in routines that didn't end with her scent on my pillow. I didn't make grand gestures. I showed up for me. And in that, she saw the real cost of walking out. She reached out again. A direct message sent at 2 a.m. We need to talk. Please. I opened it once, then archived it. No reply. Because talking would imply there was still something to fix. There wasn't. Not when she spent months dismantling what we built. Rumors spread. Mutual friends asked if everything was okay. I gave neutral answers. We're both figuring it out. But in truth, I was done figuring. I was done chasing ghosts. I became a man who valued presence over promise. And she became the quiet absence I refused to rescue. One evening, she showed up at my door. No ring, no knock, just footsteps I recognized. She stood in the hallway, shoulder turned toward the threshold, words waiting but never spoken. I didn't invite her in. I didn't shut the door. I just met her eyes for a moment that felt endless. She tried again. I don't want this to be the end. Her voice was steady, not desperate, just firm, ready. I looked past her, not with anger, with resolve. It is. Then I closed the door. No slam, no echo, just silence. Because the man she thought she could control had finally controlled himself. And walked away. The door didn't just close behind her that night. It closed behind every version of me that once begged for her presence. There was no vindication, no flicker of triumph. Just a silence that finally felt earned. I didn't block her. I didn't erase our past. I simply chose not to relive it. In the days that followed, she lingered in the shadows of our mutual circles. Not visibly, not directly, but in the subtle mentions, the looks, the pauses when her name came up. People weren't sure what had happened. I never corrected their assumptions. Let them guess. Let them imagine it was mutual. That we simply grew apart. Because the truth? It wasn't a tragedy. It was surgery. Clean, deliberate, necessary. She tried making noise without making contact. A few Instagram posts with vague captions about closure and rediscovery. A photo of her laughing, staged, tagged in places she never visited alone before. It was theater. And I wasn't buying a ticket. I had stopped measuring time in heartbreak. I marked it by the things I reclaimed. Mornings without tension, nights without suspicion, days that didn't end with silence posing as peace. I replaced the hollow rituals we once called intimacy with real routine, discipline that didn't seek validation. The strange part? She began unraveling the moment I stopped reacting. Like my silence was the only mirror that showed her the damage. She reached out again, this time through a friend. A message passed through someone we both knew. She says she misses who you were. But I wasn't that man anymore. That man tolerated crumbs and called it loyalty. That man believed love meant enduring slow death. I spent that weekend in my new space, a small apartment that smelled like fresh paint and new beginnings. I left the windows open. I let the cold in. It reminded me I was still alive. On Monday, I got a final message from her. No apology. No confession. Just 5 words. I hope you're doing okay. I didn't answer. Not because I didn't have words, but because silence was now my language, and she no longer spoke it. I didn't block her. That would have been too loud. I preferred the quiet method: unfollow, untag, untether. The digital traces disappeared slowly, deliberately. She didn't vanish from my world. I removed her brick by brick until nothing of her remained in mine. I didn't delete photos. I archived them, not for nostalgia, but for evidence. Evidence of the man I used to be. The version that stayed, tolerated, over-explained. A version I buried without ceremony. Meanwhile, she began echoing, showing up in places I used to go, commenting under posts from mutual friends. Harmless on the surface, but too precise to be accidental. I stayed still. Stillness, I learned, is mistaken for emptiness by those who only understand chaos. She texted again 2 weeks later. A full paragraph this time. No greeting, no context. Just a string of fragmented thoughts. I keep thinking about the way things ended. Maybe we rushed. Maybe we misunderstood each other. Maybe we should talk. But there was no we anymore. There was her dissonance and my decision. I never responded. Not to punish her, but because I had already buried the need to be understood. Instead, I turned my attention to something she never asked about: my own future. I went back to the gym, not out of revenge, but ritual. Reconnected with old friends I had neglected when I tried to hold our world together alone. I wasn't rebuilding. I was reclaiming. It shocked me how quickly life shifted once I stopped carrying what wasn't mine. Her moods, her silence, her discontent, all were weights I had no obligation to bear. My clarity became my shield. One night, I saw her again, unexpectedly, in a bookstore we used to visit. She looked at me like a stranger who recognized a dream. I nodded once. She tried to hold the gaze, but mine was already gone. I didn't stop. I didn't flinch. I walked right past her like I had somewhere better to be. Because I did. That moment wasn't a scene. It was a summary. Some people think closure comes from conversation. But real closure? It comes when you stop needing their voice to validate your silence. After that silent encounter in the bookstore, something shifted, not in me, but in her. She started testing the seams of the distance I'd constructed. A like here. A reaction there. Then came the message that pretended to be casual. Hey, that book we loved? There's a sequel now. Thought of you. She thought naming the past would summon it back. But I wasn't nostalgic. I was finished. She kept reaching. Messages that came late at night. Always just cryptic enough to imply regret, but never direct enough to admit guilt. Breadcrumbs, not bridges. I didn't bite. Because I knew what she missed wasn't me. It was the pedestal. The consistency. The man who made her the center of his world even when she built exits in every direction. She had mistaken my love for servitude. Thought I was a fixture, unmoving, reliable. Something she could walk away from and expect to find exactly where she left it. But I had changed the locks. Quietly. She didn't know about the new job, the new apartment across the city, the way I had rewritten my routine so there was no trace of her in it. I wasn't starting over. I was continuing, without interruption, without collapse. She called one evening. No text, no warning. Just her name blinking on the screen like a flare from a ship that had already sunk. I let it ring. Let it go to voicemail. She didn't leave one. She didn't need to. Her silence had already told the story. I just refused to be part of the epilogue. A week later, she tried one more time. A long message. Apologetic, self-aware, overly edited. It read like someone performing accountability without actually carrying any of the weight. She wrote, I was lost. I didn't know what I wanted. I never meant to hurt you. But she did. Intentionally. Repeatedly. She knew exactly where the cracks were and stepped on every one. So I archived that message too. Not to revisit, but to remind myself of what manipulation sounds like when it's dressed as remorse. I didn't respond. Because some things deserve silence. Not for revenge, but for respect of myself, of the peace I earned. She wasn't just a closed chapter. She was a book I no longer kept on the shelf. The silence wasn't awkward anymore. It became the language I spoke best. She tried again. Not to talk, but to test. Left a comment under a friend's photo she knew I'd see. Slipped my name into conversations with people we once shared. Not to reconnect. Just to see if I was still watching. I wasn't. I had stopped tracking her moves because I had recalibrated my own. My world didn't orbit her anymore. My mornings started without hesitation. No more waiting for a text that never came or deciphering tone from a one-word reply. I filled my space with new things. A different gym. Different people. Conversations that weren't laced with subtext or emotional landmines. I wasn't healing. I was evolving. The man I had been with her was dependable, forgiving to a fault. The man I became after her was precise. He had boundaries now, reinforced with quiet decisions that didn't require explanation. I made changes that didn't announce themselves. Removed her name from the emergency contact list. Updated my will. Sold the last piece of furniture she picked out. Repainted the walls, not to cover the past, but to prove it no longer dictated my view. It wasn't revenge. It was correction. The version of her that once took center stage in my life was now a footnote. And not even a compelling one. I learned that loyalty to the wrong person is just self-betrayal in disguise. And I had betrayed myself long enough. Now, the people around me noticed something different. They couldn't name it, but they felt it. The calm. The detachment. The subtle but undeniable strength of a man who no longer entertained the idea of being needed by someone who didn't value being kept. When she saw me again, weeks later, by accident, her face did something strange. It softened, almost like recognition mixed with disbelief, as if the man standing in front of her was someone she no longer had access to. She said nothing. Neither did I. We didn't owe each other words. Not anymore. She had made her choice clear. And so had I. I wasn't angry. I was done. It was the little things she started to miss first. Not the gifts, not the trips, not even the touch. It was the certainty. The structure of being someone's priority without having to earn it. She had confused it for routine. But now, stripped of it, she was adrift. I saw it in how she lingered near people I once called friends. Heard it in the way she mentioned my name to mutual acquaintances with a forced casualness. She had lost access, not just to me, but to the ecosystem my presence created. I wasn't cruel. I was invisible. And that scared her more than anger ever could. She reached out once. A simple message buried beneath emojis and neutral tones. Hope you're doing well. I didn't answer. Not because I wanted to punish her, but because she no longer held the position to receive a reply. You don't respond to someone who left your house in ashes and now wants to borrow a lighter. I had grown past the conversation. Every time I walked into my apartment now, it felt cleaner. Lighter. As if the walls finally got to breathe. No hidden tension. No waiting for the next emotional audit. No guessing what version of her I'd be met with. I started building a new room physically and metaphorically. A spare room I turned into a workspace. The walls, slate gray. Sharp lines. Minimalist. No sentimental clutter. A room she never entered, and now never would. That space became a symbol of who I had become. Focused. Controlled. Quiet. The kind of man who didn't need to reclaim power. He simply refused to give it away anymore. I ran into her brother once, unintentionally. He looked at me for a second longer than politeness required. Then he said, "You seem different." I nodded. "I am." He said nothing else. He didn't need to. Some people recognize survival when they see it. Others recognize escape. I had done both. She didn't post about healing anymore. The vague spiritual slogan stopped. Maybe because the audience had grown tired. Or maybe because even she knew it was never about growth. It was about escaping accountability dressed as enlightenment. The last I heard, she was figuring things out. Living in short-term rentals, switching jobs, cycling through connections that didn't challenge her. Still looking for freedom in the spaces where no one demanded depth. But I didn't check on her. I didn't care. My life no longer required her narrative to function. My peace wasn't something she could disrupt anymore. Because I had taken it back the moment I stopped asking her to stay. She called me one night. Blocked number. I didn't answer. A minute later, a message came through. Can we talk? Just one last time. There was nothing left to say, but I read the message anyway twice. Not out of longing. Out of final confirmation. She was circling the drain of a story I'd already closed. Her voice used to hold me hostage. Now it was just background noise I'd finally turned off. I didn't block her. That would have meant I still felt something. Instead, I let the message sit there, unanswered, preserved in silence. My final reply was the absence of one. That was my power now, never needing to explain my exit to the one who forced it. I had become the man who didn't chase, didn't beg, didn't revisit broken bridges. She had burned every one of them with a smile, thinking she'd never need to cross them again. Now she stood at the edge of something irreversible, and I wasn't on the other side. A week passed. Then two. She tried subtlety, likes on old posts, comments through mutuals, shared memories surfacing in her feed. The digital footprint of a woman looking for a way back and without knocking. But I had changed the locks the day I stopped explaining my worth. I wasn't building walls out of spite. I was building structure after chaos. She didn't understand the difference. I cleaned out my last drawer of shared memories. Old cards, photos, small gifts meant to signify permanence. I tossed them quietly. Not out of anger, but necessity. You don't keep relics from someone who tried to erase you. People often ask if I ever missed her. The truth? I missed who I thought she was. And even that faded faster than I expected. The silence I feared had become my sanctuary. The emptiness she left behind wasn't hollow, it was breathable. You don't miss the storm when you finally feel the sun. I live differently now. Not louder. Just cleaner. Sharper. My energy doesn't spill anymore. It's focused. Directed. Reserved only for those who understand the currency of loyalty. She once told me she didn't belong to anyone. She was right. And that's why she lost everything. Because love doesn't chain you, it anchors you. And she mistook every anchor for a cage. I didn't walk away to teach her a lesson. I walked away to remember who I was before she convinced me I was hard to love. And now, I live in a world where her name is just a chapter. When I don't reread. Because the loudest thing I ever said to her was nothing. The silence wasn't absence. It was finality. She gave up on belonging. So I gave up on asking her to stay. Now I don't speak her name. And that's how I know I'm free. Been through it? When they crossed a line and you made sure they felt it.